All right, Krystal, what's on your radar?
Well, CNN is out with a new poll of New Hampshire, and it's got some big news for Bernie Sanders. The Vermont senator has jumped into first in that key primary state. Meanwhile, Biden dropped like a stone. I wonder what part of his suck it up and vote for Joe pitch is falling flat. Poor CNN doesn't seem to be taking the news all that well. As Ryan Grimm pointed out, they wrote 5 different stories about the poll, and none of them bothered to mention that Sanders is in first. The closest they came was this headline: Sanders and Warren sit at the top in New Hampshire, but there's no clear frontrunner. My favorite headline by far, though, was this one: Buttigieg in fourth, but a strong fourth. You literally cannot make this stuff up. There's a lot of good news for Sanders buried in this poll. First of all, don't tell all the pundits who call him divisive and angry and say he makes their skin crawl, but Sanders actually has the highest favorability rating of any of the candidates. Turns out that outside of pundit land, normal people actually really like Bernie Sanders. He also wins easily when voters are just asked which candidate they like the most. His 27% tops Biden's second place 20%. Elizabeth Warren comes in fourth in this metric, but I'm sure if you ask the folks at CNN, they'll tell you it's a strong fourth. If you look at who voters trust on the issues, Bernie also does extremely well. He tops the field in terms of who voters would trust in health care, which is weird since we are consistently told how Medicare for all will kill seniors or whatever. And he tops the field in who voters trust to handle climate change. As it turns out, those are the top 2 issues for primary voters in the Granite State. So some good numbers all around here for Bernie. And also for Buttigieg, of course, who will be well positioned if all of the top 3 contenders spontaneously self-destruct. This poll fits well into a broader dynamic that seems to be developing post-debate. In the polls that we've seen so far, Sanders appears to have picked up steam. I guess Bernie really is back, while at the same time, Warren's momentum seems to have decidedly flagged. Now, it's a little too early to call it a true trend, but even the consistently Bernie skeptical Nate Silver is noting his upsurge. Sanders added a couple of points in a recent Morning Consult national poll where he inched ahead of Warren in the early primary states. Like the CNN New Hampshire poll, Bernie's favorability numbers top the field in this one as well. And overall, since the debate, he's seen the largest upswing of any of the candidates in the RCP national polling average. He's gone up from 15.6% on debate day to 17.7% now. Now, at the same time, Biden and Warren have both fallen. Biden's drop has, of course, been much discussed in the media, but Warren's post-debate drop in this metric has been almost identical. She's down 1.7 points in the RCP national average from 23.4 to 21.7. But no one has really talked about it at all. Her drop is actually even more significant if you compare where she is now to her recent high of 26.8% when she briefly overtook Joe Biden to claim frontrunner status. Now, if I had to guess what's going on here, I'd say there's a couple of things. First, looks to me like the mini surge of Mayor Pete, Pistol Pete, as Van Jones calls him, has cost Warren a bit of her support with affluent white liberals. Prior to this debate, Warren had been rapidly consolidating the educated white liberal vote. It certainly wouldn't be surprising if Pete's media-fueled rise has eaten into Warren's support a little bit. Digging into those New Hampshire numbers, Pete is best liked by Hillary voters with post-grad degrees, a group that has also had a strong Warren affinity. Second, though, I believe Bernie's greater contrast with Warren is starting to pay dividends. In his speeches and interviews, he's really started making some distinctions with Warren, the capitalist to her bones. This is showing up in one particularly interesting metric in that New Hampshire poll. Voters were asked which candidate was most progressive. Now, last month, Bernie beat Warren on that metric, but only by 17 points. This month, he's jumped out to a 29-point lead on that issue. If you want to win, voters have to understand what makes you different from the pack. And this metric shows that Bernie is effectively making the case that if you're looking for a progressive candidate, he's the guy. But finally, as Michael Moore said to me in Sagar last week, Bernie does just seem to have a little extra mojo post-heart attack. Just take a look at him making the case for working class pressure yesterday with CNBC's John Harwood.
Look, what happens right now, your average politician sits around and he or she thinks, they say, let's see, if I do this, I'm going to have the big money interest putting 30-second ads against me. So I better not do it. But now they're going to have to think, if I don't support an agenda that works for working people, I'm going to have President Sanders come into my state and rally working class people. You know what? At the end of the day, the 1% is very powerful. No denying that. The 99%, when they're organized and prepared to stand up and fight, they are far more powerful.
That's it. That's the case right there. Perhaps all those pundits who said he was finished and should drop out after his health scare should apologize LOL, that will never happen. They'll just keep being wrong and getting raises. Sagar, I thought that number on who is the most progressive was particularly interesting.
Fascinating, absolutely.
Because that shows how they're separating.
The 29% gap. This is what the media is never going to dig into, which is that these little numbers, the progressive number and the favorabilities, matters immensely because that 29% expanding gap, what does that tell you? That the people who are most motivated about what's happening in the country, particularly on the left, overwhelmingly are choosing Bernie over Warren. Now, that doesn't mean they wouldn't back Warren in a general election,
right.
But in Iowa and New Hampshire in particular, these are good little microcosms of how things might be shaping up across the nation. So that split is a massive victory for Bernie Sanders, right? And it's also a defeat for Elizabeth Warren, which the more she equivocates on Medicare for all, the more that she continues not to have a plan for health care. That is something that is going to continue separating. And she really has a big risk if she wants to keep her progressive bona fides going into the general election.
Right. And also, I think there's the more she seems sort of comfortable in cozying up to the Democratic establishment.
Right.
Progressives are very mistrustful of the Democratic establishment, rightfully so, given the policies that they've pursued in the past. Also in this poll, they have the second choice numbers, which we love to dig into.
Absolutely.
And bad news for Pete Buttigieg there, because the second choice for Bernie and Biden and Warren is all each other. So if Biden drops, Bernie and Warren are going to benefit. If Warren drops, Bernie predominantly is going to benefit. If Bernie drops, Biden's predominantly going to benefit. So this is the top three. This is what we're looking at, strong fourth places notwithstanding.
I don't know how many times we can say it here, and I'm baffled because people who get paid a lot of money on cable keep thinking that voters are ideological. They are not ideological. The only thing they really believe in, and I say it all the time, is trust, which is you can trust these three candidates. They've made a coherent case to the American people for why they should be the president of the United States. And Buttigieg's case is not coherent. At this point, it would show up in the polls.
Right.
It's not going to happen.
Right.
And yet they just continue to think that if Joe Biden were to fall out, that Pete Buttigieg were to go up. It's just not, it's literally not going to happen.
Right. In fact, we see a lot more overlap between Warren and Buttigieg, which is, again, doesn't make sense if you're just thinking in purely ideological terms, since Buttigieg has positioned himself more in that Biden centrist lane. But that's not how people really operate.
It's just not how people work. And, it's funny, like, we're looking at these favorability numbers and all of this. This is a big deal for Bernie, the highest favorability rating in the entire state. He's got, look, he won the state last time. He's got the infrastructure. He is that neighbor. Elizabeth Warren is, I saw this as an interesting take recently, which is that Warren basically benefited from a summer boom where she faced zero media scrutiny because Biden and Bernie were getting all of it. Well, now it's your time in the barrel. And let's see if that favorability rating continues, because Biden and Bernie have staying power, right? Like they're doing just fine. She's never faced a real critical news cycle, and I think now is the time.
Yeah, we'll see if that ever really happens, though. All right, Sagar's Radar's next. Stay tuned.